it's just wonderful to be here on the most perfect day of the year. It's almost a shame to be inside, but I at least could look outside and see that. I started off my morning going out with Laura Sanders up to the Haydenville Library, where I used to walk as a little girl and get my weekly stack of books to read, and that was an enormous pleasure for me to be back in that little one-room library where I got perhaps my start as a library reader. Then to be here today, where, as Chris said, I really got my start as a library worker, is really wonderful. And to have come in February and been honored by the college in such a way to receive the Smith Medal, and really touching my heart was the banner over the door that said first librarian medalist. Was just terrific. And what I was saying to people was, I was here at Smith, I got the medal, got on a plane after the reception and flew back and went to Buckingham Palace to meet the Queen. So it was kind of a high week, but it was really, meeting the Queen was anticlimactic. She couldn't hold a candle to the So that's what's happening, and so it is a wonderful life, and I'm glad to be here in front of you. So we're here today, and we're really celebrating the centennial of the Neilson Library. And this is a library that stood at the heart of the Smith campus for 100 years, and through whose doors have passed girls and women and men who have entered really unknowing, but have emerged more knowledgeable and wiser as a result of their experiences within these walls. And I was thinking about some of the people who have come here and studied here and read here. Ada Comstock, Anne Morrow, Mary Ellen Chase, Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, Sylvia Plath, Molly Ivins, Laura D'Andrea Tyson, Margaret Edson, and Tammy Baldwin. And those are just some of the really well-known people, but there are thousands of others less well-known. But I believe they were also profoundly affected by the time they spent at Smith. And they found this library a resource and a refuge, a place where they could explore and where they could learn, and they could test their thinking with the great minds of the millennia, whose ideas were recorded in the books that have been housed here. So 100 years ago, what was the concept of a library? We can see from this rather imposing edifice that knowledge was power. It was physically located, physically sited in the center of campus. And it was a library that was funded like hundreds of the Carnegie libraries of the late 19th and 20th centuries as a testament to Carnegie's belief that individuals could educate themselves through libraries, which contained collections, distinctive collections, organized on open shelves for discovery, and there were generous reading rooms where people could pursue quietly the quest of knowledge that would better oneself morally and economically. And the Smith Library, named for President Neilson after his death in 1946, held only 45,000 volumes in 1910. But within 25 years, grew to become the largest library of any women's college. And you can see from the imposing and gracious rooms, this browsing room in which we're located today, the original periodicals room across the hall, and the elegant reading room running the length of the building, which I now think would have had a vista over Paradise Pond when it was built, because that other building wouldn't have been there. The library was really intended to be a great statement about the importance of knowledge. I think most of us formed our views of libraries very early. Libraries were places where we visited to select books to read, first for pleasure and later for knowledge. and where we consulted great compendia, reference books, and other printed sources. They contain books that we didn't have in our homes, either because our families didn't value or couldn't afford to build personal libraries, or because the extent of human knowledge and experience captured in books and manuscripts, and music and maps exceeded the capacity of any single individual to collect. If books were the primary object and buildings secondary, a destination where the books were housed, I think in some respects librarians always seemed tertiary. They were well-meaning. I remember them as mostly smiling older women who seemed like guardians of the collection rather than greeters inviting you to come in and consume with abandon. And I was thinking, Lori was asking me this morning about the Haydenville Public Library, which had very limited opening hours. I think when I was a kindergartner, might have been staffed by a Mrs. Bisbee, who was a plump, white, wispy-haired woman who had attended Smith, I think. So, maybe it's just the image that we have. So it's well known that libraries were staffed by women, but mostly headed by men. And that's particularly true of large university libraries. My predecessor at Oxford was Edward Williams Byron Nicholson. He's my predecessor. He was Bodley's librarian 13, not 24. He headed the library from 1882 to 1912. But he was a pioneer in appointing women to responsible roles. But even he, when he was asked in 1897 if Bodley would ever see a woman at the helm, said, let's see, he said, Nicholson, he's told a group of American librarians that if in 100 years' time he was told of the appointment of a female Bodley's librarian, he would reply, I'm sure she would amply justify her appointment. So, there we are. Nicholson speaks from the grave, I hope, about that. But at Smith, where presidents and faculty, actually, when I was in college, were predominantly male, the situation has been reversed for the college librarian, where in 120 years, only 10% of the years have had a man in office. But Chris Loring has now had a decade heading the Smith College libraries, and I think they've thrived under his leadership. But it's nice to know, I think particularly, that we've gotten to the stage where gender isn't an obstacle, and where appointments are made on merit, and categories such as sexual orientation or race or ethnicity are really irrelevant as barriers, but serve as positive features in the complementing the diversity of an organization. And I think in my, although it's much touted that I'm the first woman librarian, it doesn't feel that way inside. You know, I feel like I'm just a person there at the bottom. All right. Well, 100 years. We're talking about 100 years that this building has been open. But librarians don't think in 100-year time horizons. Nicholson might have been looking forward to that absurd time when a woman might have headed the Bodleian. But we're thinking now, it seems to me, in 2 to 3 year time horizons often. The future of libraries is a perpetual topic. One that in my career has seen the death of libraries predicted about as much as with as much frequency as the paperless office. But libraries remain more vibrant than ever. They do continue to be organized around collections, space, and people. But just as the Smith Library, which opened here for use right after Thanksgiving in 1909, was an exemplar of the modern library, with innovations evolving with the times, so will our libraries in the future change and adapt to the times in which they operate. Innovations in the early 20th century included electric and gas lighting, allowing readers to pursue their work beyond daylight hours, OpenStax, which permitted users unfettered and unfiltered access to a wealth of knowledge, and the belief that undergraduates, as well as advanced scholars, should have a full range access to publications. Well, today's expanded concept of the library includes public collections in the broadest sense. Now, I once received a rather angry denunciation from a Cornell alumna because in a dense 2-page letter I had written about the library, I had not once used the word book. And I thought, how could that be? And I reread the letter, I got it out, I'd sent it to 3,000 people, and I was castigated by this woman for doing this. I reread it, and indeed, she was right. I had used terms like volumes, collections, material, information, and other nouns that might have included books as a subset. But I realized in my everyday world of content, being held in a variety of containers, of which books were one, that collided with her very deep sense of what was the core mission of a library, which was to collect, preserve, and organize books. I should tell you, I told my development person after that, never let me send out another letter that doesn't have the word book in it. We're going to use the word book 10 times in every letter. But the fact was, in my everyday life that I had to work in the library, books are only one aspect of what's happening in libraries now. So, 10 years ago, the lion's share of libraries' budget was devoted to acquisition, cataloging, and storage and management of books. And 10 years ago, many librarians scoffed at the idea that an entire collection could be digitized. Now Google has done that for vast libraries at Stanford and at Michigan. And at Oxford, they've digitized 140 million pages. Has every work in the world been digitized? No. Have the standards obtained perfection? No. But I do think we are moving very, very rapidly into that era where almost all published books will be digitized. But we live in an era of very rapid change. One of my favorite New Yorker cartoons from longer than a decade ago shows a man at his door with his wife, and he's being taken away by the Grim Reaper. And the wife offers her husband this reassurance and says, "Oh, relax, dear. Change is good." And I think some of us in libraries might feel like, it's the Grim Reaper coming to take away the library as we know it. But we need to remind ourselves that, well, maybe it's heaven on the other side. Maybe we could do this. So what is the future of the library? Is it going to be obsolete? In November a year ago, Newsweek magazine featured the headline, "Books aren't dead, they're just going digital." And this very provocative issue, which proclaimed the reincarnation of the book in the e-book, was about Amazon's Kindle, a portable electronic device in which vast libraries of digitized text can be stored and read. And I think over 2 million Kindles have been sold. And I was interested, I'm staying at the Autumn Inn, and this morning I went in for breakfast, and there was a man seated by the window reading. I didn't pay much attention to him. But when I came back with my coffee, I looked and I thought, oh, he's got a Kindle there. He's totally attached to his Kindle. And he was white-haired, so all right. It's not all 22-year-olds who are doing this. So the Kindle itself may not prevail as the dominant device on which to read ebooks. It seems fairly certain that ebooks are here to stay and will ever be more integrated with learning and even reading for pleasure. And on Thursday, I'm going to pick up is that tomorrow? I'm going to pick up in New York. I've commissioned my 23-year-old son to get me an iPad. And because they're not released in the UK yet, I've never made the leap to an ebook. I've had laptops, but I thought I think this device, this might actually do it in the connection. So I think that we're starting to see, and how many were sold in the first weekend, 300 or 400,000, something like that. So Kindle sold 2 million and Apple sells 300,000, and ebooks are selling like hotcakes for that. I think we're going to see that. Now, a colleague recently gave me a paperback book called Future Files, the 5 trends that will shape the next 50 years. The author is Richard Watson, and he's discussing these trends, which I'll just tell you are aging, the power shift eastward, global connectivity, green technologies, genetics, robotics, internet and nanotechnology, and the environment. That's very stimulating, but what really I loved about this book was a table that listed an extinction timeline. And the extinction timeline went from 2000 to 2050. So there are things that the author says are they're irrelevant after a certain amount of time. So for example, in 2007, he said letter writing would be no longer relevant. So the archives, we better watch that. But I mean, it is true that text message is not letter writing. In 2014, I like this one because it's getting lost will be irrelevant, and I guess that's because we'll all have like GPSs in our clothing or something like that. And I'm very much looking forward to that because I get lost all the time. In 2020. And we might not regret this, but post offices. And in 2030, again, I like this one, house keys. Because presumably we'll have some kind of iris recognition or something to get into our house. And also, I like this one. At the outer margins in 2050, he's got ugliness. Because presumably by that time we will have genetically engineered corpulence and bulbous noses and things like that. And also past 2050, so let's think about it. Death. He thinks maybe we won't be dying anymore. But you have to take them with a grain of salt when because you're laughing at these two. In 2018, he lists libraries. So after that initial shock of seeing your own tombstone, you notice that following in 2 years, so 2020, is copyright, and alongside Belgium in 2049 is Google. So you can go from being a little country, a little old country, to a new upstart internet business, but the horizons are short. Well, Google has itself been the source of uncertainty about the future of libraries. And their digitization program, which has been done in partnership with some of the world's leading universities and institutions, has captured the public imagination. The goal of the project is to create a digital library that makes available millions of books that are converted into searchable full text. Most people do draw the conclusion that all the books in the library have been digitized, and indeed the entire contents of libraries, including manuscripts and archives. And of course, we know that that's not true. And I think Google's mission statement is particularly confounding because it says, Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And I think, oh, isn't that the job of libraries? Who are they to be taking on our job? But it becomes part of the meta-library, accomplishing what no single library or consortium has achieved. except, of course, that it doesn't really take on all the roles of the library. It's useful to consider both the prediction of extinction and the new models that corporate entities such as Google represent. The demise of the library is equated with the death of print and the replacement of paper with digital access. And the bricks and mortar library exists in the view of those who see the digital library as signaling the obsolescence of the institution, particularly as a storehouse for books or as a place to consult publications or from which they might be borrowed. Well, first there's the fallacy that everything is digital. Secondly, that everything that's digital is free. And third, that libraries exist principally to house and serve books. And to pigeonhole the library in this way is to commit the failure of a business that doesn't recognize its real role. I'm missing a page here. Well, that will be good. So what we're finding in libraries is that they are really quite dramatically transformed in this digital age. They are much more about places where people come together and work. And they are places that, for people who enjoy a particular ambiance associated with learning and who want to engage with other people and artifacts in the pursuit of knowledge and understanding. And at the same time, technology makes it feasible for almost any place to become a library. My colleague, Paula Kaufman, who's also a Smith graduate, class of '69, and she's Dean of Libraries at the University of Illinois, speaks of the library as place and the place as library. So we are here now in a place that is a library that is very special to us, but now we're able to be in a car, on a beach, on top of a mountain, and still be connected with the library in the future. The direction of the library to the future is pointed by many renovations and new libraries being constructed today. These buildings offer a mix of spaces aimed at meeting a variety of user needs. They include traditional reading rooms with high ceilings and book-lined walls, and where individual readers sit at tables and work silently. And I think these rather inspiring sanctuaries are deeply cherished by all ages of user. And they're likely to remain an iconic aspect of libraries over time. Yet even these libraries, reading rooms, are undergoing transformations as more and more students are integrating, and scholars as well, are integrating digital resources and use computer technology in their creative work. There's a transition to a much less formal environment, one in which soft chairs and furniture that can be configured according to user preferences, along with coffee and conversation and an array of consumer devices. So whether it's the iPad or the mobile phone or laptops or ebook readers. And where previously libraries were havens of solitude and silence, I think tomorrow's libraries are really going to be buzzing with activity. Maybe not throughout. I think there will still be these quiet spaces. That's very important to have it. But this really should be a beehive of activity. So we'll be accommodating different learning styles. But increasing portions of the library space will be devoted to new uses. There'll be group study spaces that will bring students from across the university together to work on team assignments. And I could see on the way down to Chris's office when I stopped by earlier this afternoon, these spaces that have been created here that are tables that could have 4 or 5 students perhaps. There's a plasma screen. People can sit there, they can talk, they have their coffee, they can work together, and they were very much in use. And I wanted desperately to stop and take pictures because they were such a good example of the way in which students are working together. And I think more and more we're finding in college and university that students are asked to work on group assignments, that people are working in teams. And when we graduate and we go out into the world, we're asking people to work together in teams. And so this creates a very good model for the kind of behavior that people are expecting to do. There's more peer learning that is occurring. Then we have seminar rooms within the library walls that facilitate the integration of teaching that draw on special collections. And they're aided by the latest hardware and software. They're enriched by experts who are there, including academics and curators of collections, with students and others engaged in mastering a particular topic or discipline. So more and more, we're creating at Oxford a renovated new Bodleian library. It was previously a book warehouse, a book fortress, really, was what it was like. Had 3.5 million volumes in it. But in fact, we're finding that it makes much more sense to move books that are very, very infrequently used, once every 9 years, once every 90 years, to a facility that is half a day's distance away, or it's an hour away, but it'll take half a day by the time we retrieve something. And instead, we're using the space that we are renovating to be an atrium where we can welcome the public, exhibition galleries where people can come in and be excited by what's inside. Millions of people have walked by this building and it's sort of said to them, keep out, not for you. This is a lockbox. And now we're opening up. We're creating glass sides in that lockbox so people can see what's in there. We're inviting them to come in. I flew over on yesterday with one of our engrossments of Magna Carta on the plane. I can tell you travel very well when you're flying with a $25 million document. I was right there in upper class in Virgin Airlines, and that was great. But Magna Carta, we have 4 engrossments of Magna Carta, and they're never displayed because we don't have a place where we can put it out and have it be secure, and where we can accommodate the traffic that comes to it. We put it up one day, one wintry day in December, and with almost no advertising, just sort of a little local announcement on the news, and 1,000 people queued up in the winter's day to come and see it. Well, think about the ability to create proper spaces where people can come in and enjoy, and Martin's nodding his head, and really see and enjoy the collections that we have in our libraries and open them up. And then, in the same building that I'm talking about, in the upper levels where the general public won't go, we'll have places where students and scholars can either come in and consult in a traditional reading room, a traditional reading room that is fully connected with wireless access and that sort of amenity. But more importantly, these seminar rooms adjacent where you can actually teach using objects. Because in the digital age, in the age of mechanical reproduction, where everyone can have a copy of something, what really matters for students particularly at a residential university, is the ability to come in contact with an original, authentic primary source. There is something very different about the document itself, seeing the vellum, seeing the ink on the page, seeing Lisa Baskin's here in the front row. We just heard Peter Stallybras give a talk. Peter will be here this coming soon, next year, right? In the autumn. And you know, seeing the holes in the page where the sheets have been bound together, that conveys a kind of information that is much more immediate, it seems to me, than the digital itself. And so we're going to integrate these things together. So with that, when we have these master classes, as we recently had one with an author, Philip Pullman, who did his Dark Materials, which was made into the movie The Golden Compass. And he was talking about Lyra's Oxford, fact and fiction in Lyra's Oxford. And he had his publisher, he had his the graphic artist who had worked on the illustrations, and he had the person who had bound it together. And they were all talking about the making of a book. And 200 people came in and were in rapt attention to learn about the making of a book. And we want to be able to have much more of that experience of learning about the art of the book and what the book is as a medium for distribution and why books change lives, in addition to the content in the book. The content is obviously important, but we want to have that. So I think we will find in the physical environment of the library, fewer books will be housed in immediate proximity to readers, because their surrogates, their digital surrogates, can allow access for purposes of getting information. If you're looking strictly for the content and the information, but if you're looking for the content of the artifact, then you will want that to be there. And so these exhibition spaces, or readings, or master classes, they're all ways in which libraries are kindling the excitement of discovery with cultural objects in their custody. And we're also finding a much more extroverted sense of being a librarian. This is my chance to talk about my son was a Boy Scout, and the scoutmaster called me up one day and he said, "Sarah, I've got this little boy in the troop and he's not getting along well with other kids, and I called his mother to say that Johnny needs to learn to be more of a team player." And she said, "Oh, no, he doesn't. No, he's going to be a librarian." And he doesn't. And I said, "Oh, Jerry, no, we're all about teams and librarians now." And you know, that one of the things that we are becoming in libraries, the librarians are, we're getting a sense of the excitement, the sort of dazzling excitement of the objects that we hold, that we're trusted to hold in our libraries. And so we're reaching out to people, we're reaching out across generations. It might be school children coming in, or it might be elder hostel coming, but either way, you're expanding your audience beyond the 18 to 22-year-old or the 17 to 30-year-old that you might have in a university. So Smith Libraries, I think, are really enjoying this kind of renaissance. Whether it's the new reading room that's going to materialize across the hall with comfortable chairs and conversational groupings. That's one space that fits this model, and the remodeled areas of the library that incorporate the computer-enriched areas. The very distinguished architectural firm, Shepley, Bulfinch, Richardson, and Abbott, are now working with the college on a master plan to transform the libraries within the larger institutional visit. And I think this returns to the concept of the library as a physical space but the attention to the physical does have to be balanced by attention to the virtual. So the library of the future is characterized by this ability of the library to connect users with information at any time and any place where information can be received digitally, which is an ever-expanding realm. So I think when libraries devote a very high proportion of their budgets on the management of print inventories today, including the acquisition and cataloging of publications, the future library will receive the materials it purchases, whether in print or original, with increasing reliance on suppliers who aggregate content and supply it with appropriate metadata. Excuse me for the lay people in the audience if I'm using these library terms like metadata. But it is an important area where we can have some great gains, because by taking advantage of these new sorts of services, we'll be able to have items become more quickly available for readers, and we'll be able to do it at a lower cost. And I think one of the great advantages of doing that is that it stretches our budget to be able to do more. And so that's really important to look at all of our operations so that we can become more efficient, because the universe of knowledge is expanding so rapidly. And I think, and I've said this before, I know I'm reaching that point in my career where I feel like I've said everything before, but that libraries are really going to be distinguished by their special collections, because more and more information that is available in digital form is ubiquitously available. So what is really distinct right now is, the Sophia Smith collection, for example, would be a prime example of something. And I think unique materials will still be slow to be digitized because of the expense involved with them. We will be moving into an era where text-based information is augmented by visual and oral media. And our libraries have often separated information by format. But our users today are going to expect seamless integration. And, that's why I haven't got my iPad yet, but, that's what I'm picturing. I'm reading along, and then I can touch something, and I can bring up a video, and I can hear it, and I think we'll be able to do that. So I think images and films and audio and maybe even other sensory experiences will come. So we might be able to conjure up the smell of madeleines, or we might be able to have one of my favorite lines from Rupert Brooke, the rough male kiss of blankets. Maybe we'll be able to feel that roughness somehow and have that delivered to users alongside text. I think that this will be context sensitive, and it will give subtext and meanings to the users. So you might have a primary source document that will be linked to secondary literature and vice versa, and you'd have films and photographs and recordings and geographical references linked to maps and atlases and the vocabulary of the texted dictionaries. This all exists right now, but it's not ubiquitous. So I think that's going to be the game that we'll see, and it's moving very quickly. I mean, I would think in the next 10 years, the timelines and political ethics would be effortlessly accessible as background or as foreground. And so it will just become more pervasive. And libraries, of course, will have then advanced technological infrastructures that can provide a sophisticated delivery to a variety of devices. This ability to create a rich environment will be achieved through the cooperation and collaboration of individual institutions, library collectives, commercial entities, and the general public. So you'll have these very big operations like Google or Amazon or iTunes or YouTube or Netflix. and they'll have this broad swath of content. But libraries will contribute their original archival material. And then the thing that I'm starting to get very interested in is this thing called crowdsourcing, but where distributed contributors can provide information over the internet. But one of the things I've thought about is at Oxford we have, it's probably in the millions of pieces of paper of scores, material relating to music. And 80% of it isn't cataloged or online. And I thought, suppose instead, and to catalog it would cost a fortune, I mean, many fortunes. And I thought, well, maybe we are actually reaching the point where I could begin to have that material digitized. And all those people out there who love music and who know music would be drawn like bees to honey and or to flowers and would be cataloging that. And although it might not be accurate, those of you who've taken part ever in the backyard bird count know that it's how many of those birds were there out there in your backyard? Did you really count them accurately? But apparently, when you extrapolate that to a whole country, you can actually get patterns that will tell you whether or not bluebirds are declining. And I think that I might be able to get, this is kind of the Huck Finn in me, I guess, I might be able to get all those music lovers to catalog my music collection. And then I would use the very well-trained people on our staff to go through and add authority to it, to really organize it in such a way. So I'm looking about that might be the salvation for archives, which are the repositories of more content than can be humanly described by experts, particularly as we're kind of in an age of contraction here in terms of staffing. Automated tagging systems will create links and overlays, and we'll have this network of expert professionals and scholars and knowledgeable lay people who will be adding the kind of connections that right now only human intelligence can add. And then searches will be displayed in a lot of different ways. We'll have visualization. At Smith, I would expect people to be able to search across the holdings of various cultural repositories, including the libraries, the museum, the plant house, and other places that hold unique objects, even including data in the computing center. But of course, people's horizons don't stop at the Great Court Gates or Elm Street or Paradise Pond. They next want to know what's in the Valley, what's in Massachusetts, what's in the US, what's in the world. And so I think libraries in the future are going to be more connected, more interconnected, not just with each other, but with knowledge providers and knowledge preservers throughout the world. So we're looking at technology. Too boring. Just saying, all I'm saying is information commons, these acres of computers that we have been creating, I think those will become, they're sort of something that will become dated. We'll need them now because not everybody has them. We need the sort of technology that individuals can't afford. We need certain types of software. But eventually, remember, I'm going to have that GPS in my shoulder to tell me where to turn, and we'll have smaller and more portable devices, so we'll be able to make those rooms, which are now sort of formidable, a little bit more personal. But social networking is really important, and if you look at Wikipedia and Facebook and YouTube and Flickr, libraries have begun delivering their services this way. And I was pleased to see Smith's Facebook page, and that they can deliver their services where a large share of their clients or their users are. And we'll find libraries contributing facts to online encyclopedias. They'll use videos to conduct orientation, and they'll offer assistance to information consumers rather than having printed guides. I mean, that's one of our savings that we're about to make in the Bodleian Library, is to switch to web-based delivery of information, the ability to print things out, but no longer spending thousands and thousands of pounds on printed guides that many people get and then pitch after they've looked at them for a minute. The scholarly products themselves will be interactive, multi-institutional, and interdisciplinary. And in such a world, the library becomes a key partner. In addition to helping people find printed, published works, I think the one big shift that we'll see for librarians is that they're going to become more partners in knowledge creation. They'll assist in developing research proposals. They'll identify content to be digitized. They'll lead projects which combine the talents of academics, information specialists, and technologists, and they'll build repositories to store and make accessible scholarly products and preserve them. Partnerships are really, I mean, one of the things about librarians, I told that scoutmaster that we were good team players. And librarians have this history of cooperation, and it's been going on for, well, probably a century, but certainly this last 50 years pretty intensively. But I think there's going to be much deeper integration across institutions. And one of the models that I can talk about is Columbia and Cornell, the institution from which I came, where they have something called Too Cool, so 2 CUL, Cornell University Library, Columbia University Library, where they are looking at how they might share staff across their institutions. Now, I did say if they want to do away with one of the university librarians and pay me double, that would be fine, because I'm sure we could do that. But but really, what you're finding is technical services operations are ripe for that, and I think that the 5 colleges have been looking at that. Cooperative collection development, new models of resource sharing, digital delivery on demand. They're making that kind of shared collection building along geographic or disciplinary lines a desirable alternative to costly duplication. I just don't think, as the amount of material being published today continues to grow, and as we've developed new ways of sharing information, that we can really afford the sort of duplication that we have in all of our institutions. So I think we'll find better ways to share information in the collection. And then for these wonderful collections that we do own, having shared storage is a good way to be able to manage our collections efficiently and economically. And again, I think the 5 colleges are doing that. Smith is really in the vanguard with shared storage and a common library online catalog, I think, or some efforts in that direction, and some shared collections. And so, although institutional identity plays a very, very strong role in libraries, so I think I'd hasten to say, and I hope I'm not offending anyone here who might work for Walmart or has a friend at Walmart. The idea is not that we would make all libraries like cookie cutters, and identical, but that we would figure out the areas in libraries where we could achieve efficiencies and standardize in that area so that we can be more diverse in our areas of specialization. So it's quite conceivable to me that the college libraries can work together even more closely, in that they might be part of a larger network of college and university libraries when we're no longer limited by geography as a result of technological advances. So in sum, I think there's a lot of change underway in libraries. And I think libraries are shifting from relying on locally held, principally text-based collections to the provision of information in a variety of formats. I would want to state in the strongest possible terms that the rumors of the demise of the book are greatly exaggerated. But at the same time, there is increasing reliance on digital access. It's, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. That's really going to be there, so we need to figure out how to integrate the two. The special collections will rise in importance, and there'll be a much stronger imperative to make these unique materials accessible through online finding aids and digitization projects. Now, library buildings will remain at the center of the university. They're going to serve as destinations for the intellectually curious, to explore interpretive exhibitions, to house teaching that's based on artifacts, and to provide a variety of spaces from these quiet reading rooms to lively group studies spaces and conversational areas. There'll be spaces for collaboration and learning, and they'll also provide the resources for the creation of new knowledge that will draw on collections, the expertise of staff, and advanced technological tools to shape ideas into new forms of expression. So if you're standing still, I think the change looks very fast, you know, it looks like it's just rushing by. But if you're moving and you're kind of running along, moping along, it seems pretty effortless. And in the 40 years I've worked as, 40 years, it's very scary, worked in libraries, first as a student and now as Bodley's librarian. I feel really exhilarated by the possibilities for advancement. I'm full of deep respect for the accomplishments of my predecessors. I spent the last couple of weekends reading history of the Bodleian from 1845 to 1945, and you know, there's nothing new under the sun now. There's never enough space. There are always people resisting change. There's always, there are always these challenges. But these men and women have prevailed and gone forward, and I'm really awed by the capabilities of my colleagues. I think our libraries are alive and vital and very thrilling places. In 2008, I think, is when the Smith Alumna Quarterly published an article about librarians, and actually 3 of us were in the same, in Emerson House, Paula Kaufman, whom I mentioned before from the class of 68, and Betsy Lamson Humphreys from class of 69. Betsy was asked why she was a librarian, and she said, well, she had finished school during the Vietnam era, and the military-industrial complex was very much in evidence. And she wanted to have a career where she never had to apologize for what she was doing. And I think today the values and the ethics of the librarian, which is coupled with this very noble mission and the excitement of new approaches for creating and sharing of ideas and information, make the profession one of the most desirable. I'm continually feeling that the future of the library is bright, that the library of the future will continue to evolve, but it will remain true to a really basic value system. And that's this connection of people who entered these doors and now may enter a website, but both. They're seeking knowledge, and they're looking for the accumulated knowledge of the past. And what do they want to do? They want to create new knowledge and new understanding for the advancement of individuals and for society. And so we're all here today. I suspect we're all sharing that common bond in terms of what we want to achieve. And I hope that you will continue to support your libraries in whatever form they are, whether they're these wonderful, gracious buildings, gracious rooms, or whether it's the hottest new device on the market that is whispering in your ear. I hope that you will celebrate libraries and continue to enjoy them. Thank you very much.
We'll give a few minutes, maybe 5 or 10 minutes for questions if you have some. So please go ahead.
On the floor.
You talked a lot about digitalization and you seem to have a very positive opinion on how books and manuscripts are being digitized for wider consumption. But could you talk a little bit on how digitization will affect the integrity of knowledge and whether or not you think that will be compromised by this kind of mass production of a new way of reading and what that will do to
Yeah, so you raise a really important question. The question about when there's mass digitization and is there some sort of compromise. And I would read that as two ways. One is sort of compromise to the integrity of the work. How do you know it's authentic? And then does it somehow shift in its value because it's got so many neighbors? So you're not looking at it as individually, but you're looking at it as part of a mass of things. And I do think the authenticity question is very important. One of the things that I didn't talk much about that libraries have historically done is to, well, they've selected items very carefully, they've preserved them, so that when you enter a library, you have a sense of the imprimatur of both the publishing house and the institution that selected it, and maybe the people who have read it. That right now we don't have that kind of footprint as secure in the digital world. So I think that's an area where we can make a contribution to the authenticity. I do think there are solutions to that, whether it's the sort of digital watermarking or something like that you can do. I think there are technical solutions, and I also think there are policy solutions that we can have. One of the things we're doing at the Bodleian is creating a system into which we can deposit political papers in the modern sense. So blogs, websites, email, text messages, all of those things that people are starting to use. And we're going to have very clear policies that will help the user determine whether that's authentic or whether it's been changed. Then the second question that I think was implicit in what you said was somehow the difference in dealing with this mass set of information. I was struck, we recently had 3 academics speak to us at Oxford, and they talked about their use of the library. And of course, all 3 of them said, well, we don't really use the library, because in their minds, using the library was equated with walking in and sitting down at a desk and reading a book. But they were actually, all 3 of them, increasingly using online sources. But what I was struck by was how, because they were using this big corpus of information that they had never had before, they were able to ask different research questions. And they were able to search across texts in ways that they couldn't in an individual one that was simply beyond the capability. And I remember talking to a social scientist a few years ago who told me how much their research had changed on, let's say, cancer, because they used to have to search incidence of breast cancer in a particular county almost manually, by looking at the records of hospitals and doctors. And now suddenly they had this data from a health system, and they could look across the country and see patterns that they weren't really physically able to do when they were doing it manually. And I think we're going to start to see that kind of shift as well in our humanities scholarship, because people will be able to look across texts and deeper and drill down deeper into texts in ways that they haven't been before.
Thank you.
Yes.
To follow up on that, I think one of the other issues being raised by this station are sort of problems that the consumer industry is having with questions like how do we create content and positive creation of content, like in ways that still lead to high quality and like couple that with broad access. So can you speak a little bit about the role of libraries in achieving the creation of content?
The role of libraries in the creation of content. Can I boil it down to that? Yeah. Okay. Good. Yes. Well, what I'm starting to see, particularly, I was at Cornell before I went to Oxford, and so I would find that we would have on our staff in the library someone who had a PhD in a scientific field, let's say. And she might go and work on a team of people in a lab and looking at bioinformatics and introducing her knowledge of sources into the team. And so she would have even been at the start written into the research grant, be part of this whole team in the lab. And then when it comes to be published, I mean, today we can't really quite nail down something finally for publication. It keeps mutating. It keeps getting changed in the electronic environment. And so I think the job of the librarian is tracing those mutations and reporting them back to people who need to know about them. So those are some of the ways in which perhaps they're involved in knowledge creation. Yes?
I was very interested in the remarks you made about the difference between the book as an artifact and the information contained in its text. I couldn't help looking around at some of the books on the shelves as you were talking and thinking, you know, these books so elegantly bound and beautifully printed, illustrated, that as the museum becomes a place where one can go and see and come into contact with the book as an artifact, it's beginning to sound more like having the function of a museum, a place where one goes to see the original or the rare or the special, because the information, the text can be found somewhere else. Would that be a fair analogy that we might be moving, not that it would be only a museum, but that would be something more of its role than it would have?
That might be a fair statement of what I said. One of the things that I'm very conscious of is that my museum colleagues are redefining what it means to be a museum today, too. There was a report done, oh dear, now I can't remember who did it, but it was the Benson Foundation, maybe 14 years or so ago. And they did these focus groups of people, and they said, oh, in 30 years no one will go to the library, it'll be just like a museum full of dusty objects. And but when you then compare the library to the museum, no museum wants to be thinking it's full of dusty objects. It's also about learning about the materiality of something and how that relates to the content and how the two work together. Although I did think what you said was probably a fair statement, restatement of what I said and an improvement on it. Yes?
One of the things I'd like to talk about with you for a moment is the library as a place. And what I'm finding in the world is that everything is a beehive of activity. Mm-hmm. It is hard to find solitude. Mm-hmm. And it may be very old-fashioned, but I think that creating knowledge, being creative, usually takes solitude. And it's hard to find it in a library anymore. Mm-hmm. Everything is so busy. And students in their own dormitories, everything is active. You need a place where somebody can find that possibility of solitude.
Yeah, I hope you could hear what Margaret was saying, but no, you couldn't. Was that everywhere you go, things are, there's a beehive of activity, but you need solitude to be able to think creatively. And that if you're in a student room, you're kind of bombarded with sensory experiences, and that might not be the most conducive environment always for learning. And so the library as a place has served that role. It's been the sort of sanctuary, it's been the place for inspiration, it's been the place where you could come and work in solitude, but in the company of others who are working like that as well, which I think is an important aspect of the library. And the thing that I would say, I don't disagree with anything that you said. I think that's really important. But I think one of the things I'm learning is that there's such a variety of learning styles, and creativity for one person comes through solitude, and creativity for another is sparked by being with another person. And that libraries, these are big places, and far from being, I used to give a talk which was called, I led off with a slide that had been on the Chronicle of Higher Education, which pictured one of those vast reading rooms and there was no one in it. And it was called the Deserted Library. And it was because in the absence of any technology and in a style that wasn't compatible with the way students work, they weren't going there. And so now what I think we're doing is we're creating different types of spaces. We're allowing people choice. So there's a choice for some people to come and work in a very large, beautiful, quiet reading room. But there's also a choice for people to come and have their can of Coke and well, maybe Coke is banned here, isn't it? But to have some kind of refreshment and to be with another person and to put your. I'm thinking of a man at Cornell who was a librarian at Cornell, and he saw a student putting his foot up on the furniture, and he went up to him and he said, "You wouldn't do that at home, would you?" And I said, "Well, David, he would." He would. So I think it's about choice. It's about having variety. It's about having choice. It's not one thing or the other, but it's a spectrum of choices that we're looking for.
I still want to see the other lost.
Yeah, no. And I mean, I'm presiding over these. Well, I happen to think this is one of the most beautiful spaces that I know. I think this is just a lovely, lovely library. But whether I'm in Duke Humphreys Library at Oxford, some of the Radcliffe Camera, some of the most beautiful library spaces ever designed. And do I want those to turn into a zoo? No. They should be preserved for what they are, as the finest examples of architecture in libraries. But we have other places. We have a lot of other places that we can build in as well. I think
that's it. Thank you very much.